Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Live Healthy Now podcast. As always, thank you for listening, for taking this time out of your day, whatever you're doing, to join us and find out what might be able to help you improve your health and well-being. So today I have a really great guest with me, and it's quite a juicy topic, shall we say. It's one that I know many people struggle with, and we're going to dive really deep into this topic of your inner critic and self-doubt and how to be more compassionate with yourself, because self-compassion is quite often the missing piece of your well-being. You know, we can do all of the stuff like eating healthy, going to the gym, moving our bodies, trying to sleep better. But if our mindset isn't in a place where we have that self-belief and self-compassion, you know, built into those healthy habits, then we're probably still not going to feel the way we want to. So I've got Tom Cleary with me today, and I'm going to do a very brief introduction and then get straight into the conversation with Tom. So Tom is a personal development, well-being and mental health consultant, trainer and coach. So he's got lots of hats on, and Tom knows through his own journey with burnout and overwhelm and struggling with mental health, how important it is to have that self-compassion. So welcome to the podcast, Tom. It's great to have you.
It's lovely to be here, Nicola. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for your time. And I'm really, as I said, looking forward to diving into this topic. But before we do, just to get started, I like to find out from our guests what their most impactful healthy habit is, if you want to share a little bit about yours.
Mine's probably my meditation practice, I think, because my brain can be very busy. And so I try to make sure that I have a regular time in the mornings. And if I can do in the middle of the day as well, just to kind of calm down and refocus. And I think that the number of times it changes my outlook on things, and something which was really bothering me, was a really big deal for, suddenly is in perspective and isn't. So it gives me a bit of a reset for my brain a lot.
Brilliant, love that. And do you use an app or something to guide you with the meditation practice?
I like to use lots of different things. My sort of default is just using my own kind of wording, and I'll just use myself. But I also have a Muse headband that I use as well, where like kind of you get the feedback directly about that. Occasionally, I'll use the Insight Timer app, where just a timer with a gong sound to signify how long you've been doing that. So it depends on what my outcome is for that bit or how long I've got to do it, but normally just myself.
Yeah, oh, that's really good because a lot of people do struggle with meditation. I certainly have. I've tried different types, and I think for most people starting out guided meditation, something with somebody talking are really good because a lot of us struggle because we can't slow our mind down and get really present. So it's great that you've managed to get to a place that you have been able to do it on your own. And yeah, meditation or anything else with a mindfulness type, element and practice to it is really great to reset. And it's something I'm working on as well because I'm not the best at including that in my daily habits. And it's been a goal that I set at the start of the year. So yeah, maybe you'll inspire me to take that little 10-minute pause today and have a reset.
I hope so. It's
So
taken me
Tom,
oh,
yeah,
sorry, Nicola.
let's dive.
It's taken a long
Go
time for
on.
me to get to that point. And I did it also when I found a meditation or recording I really liked, and I did it several times and learnt it. I would then re-record it in my own voice and listen back to myself. And that was that transition step between doing somebody else's recording and being able to do it without that. So that might be worth trying for you at some point.
Yeah, that's a really good tip, actually. And it's surprising because most people don't like the sound of their voice, which maybe it might be part of something we want to dive into in this topic. But that's something that yeah, obviously doing the podcast got used to. It was a big, big confidence thing, I had to work on. And it's surprising because I have heard this from other people how much their own voice can soothe them, especially, on a night time to do a meditation in that way. So yeah, great tip there. Thank you. So I want to dive right into the heart of what we're going to talk about and ask the question, like, why are we so hard on ourselves?
It's a huge question, Nicola, and it's one where we could spend easily the next few hours talking about it. So I want to sort of do some highlights, I suppose, of it. And one of it is that we are naturally inclined to focus on negative things. It's part of keeping ourselves safe. It's part of our evolution. And it worked very well when society was very different than it is now, and when threats were external to ourselves. But now that a lot of society threats are internal, or they are things which aren't physical, that we can't fight against or run away from. And if the issue is ourselves, we turn that defense mechanism against ourselves. If we think we've failed at something, if we think we're not good enough compared to other people in society, we turn that attack inwards. So that's one of the big ones. The other one is habit. We become very used to being someone who is self-critical. We become used to using certain phrases and using language in a way which normally we wouldn't speak to anybody else in our lives like that, let alone someone we cared about. But with us, there's no holds barred on it. And so there's a kind of comfort zone of doing that. And it can be comfortable and feel safer for people to be the one who is criticizing themselves rather than the one who's made that mistake. So there can be a safety element there as well. There's lots of other reasons, but those are two of the big ones that a lot of my clients find.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating, and it's something that I've wrote and spoke about lots of times since I started the business, because the habit piece is such a big part of it that most people completely overlook. Like they're not aware that what they're doing, firstly, is damaging to them. Secondly, that it's wrong. And thirdly, that they're doing it from a place of habit, that it's even happening a lot of the time. And I was certainly caught in that trap where I was, really beating myself up, speaking to myself in lots of very derogatory ways, in ways, as you say, that if you spoke to a friend or someone you cared about, or even a colleague at work, you'd probably end up with a big fist in your face, because it's just unacceptable. And yet we've fallen into this way of, thinking and treating ourselves that does have lasting, in some cases, really traumatic, effects on how people feel and live their life, don't they? So, what kind of things do you see this playing out into with people's health and well-being? And then on the back of that, the way that they're living their lives?
I'll say one thing just before that. A really important point you brought up, Nicola, just now was that self-awareness part. And in all topics I talk about, but probably most in this one, there is that lack of self-awareness about us even doing it. It is such a natural part of what we're doing that when clients say to me, what's the first step in doing this? It is just be aware it's even happening to you, because we almost don't recognize when we are using the sort of tone of voice that we do internally, and we use those words. It's just part of our natural background noise. And it's one of the hardest things to step back from. So I love that you brought up the self-awareness part there. The impact of it is huge. I have clients and places I work with where it can be affecting businesses. If somebody is self-employed, that self-critic coming in and undermining all of their hard work, and that constant comparison to, well, they've done a better blog than me, podcast than me, they've got a better client than me. Why can't I do that? Why am I failing with this? And it's such a typical thing that for many clients I have who are new to their businesses, I say, unless you are going onto social media to directly post something, don't look at it, because all you will do is feel like you're losing out with that. And in relationships, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's personal relationships with family or friends or partners, that continual inner critic and that continual undermining that we do for ourselves has such a massive impact. And it does have a huge impact on well-being and health, because there's a misconception that compassion and self-kindness is a woolly, fluffy thing, but it's not at all. And it's not the parent saying to their child, you can have dessert all day long. It's the parent saying, you can have dessert once you've eaten your vegetables, because that's what's going to make you healthy, and in the long term, it's better for you. So it's not this weakness of, I'm going to be kind to myself and lie on the sofa all day and watch Netflix. It's right. I may not want to go and do some exercise right now, but I know that for my health and well-being and for people in my life, I am going to go and do that. So we actually make much better decisions, which are better for us long term, when we are more self-compassionate than we do when we are in that critic mode.
I love the way you've just explained that, because that's exactly it, isn't it? I think, and that's the problem, and the thing that's holding so many people back from being in a healthier relationship with themselves, is because they think, to be kind to themselves means having to do nothing or having to take time out, and that's not possible. Or, it's having to buy themselves something. It's that tangible, materialistic thing. Whereas, how you've explained it, in terms of just valuing yourself and knowing that you need to be taken care of, is that big step towards self-compassion and kindness. And then, supporting yourself when things don't feel as good or go the way that you want them to go, and cheering for yourself when things have gone well, because that's a huge part of self-compassion, isn't it? It's really, being your own cheerleader. And I do shout out about this a lot. If you listen to the podcast or follow me on social media, Fridays are a big day where I, take that point in the week as a really good point to just reflect on what you've achieved and celebrate you, because that's the kind of steps and habits that, if you build, can really strengthen those, fundamental feelings like self-compassion and support. And that all helps to build self-worth, doesn't it? Which is so valuable for all of us. And yet so many of us, as you touched on, living in a world where we're comparing ourselves to other people, others' successes, the things others have. So I can see you're nodding there. I know you're very into social connection and the impact of social media. And this has a huge part to play, doesn't it, in the trouble we have liking and loving ourselves?
So many things I want to pick up in that, Nicola. Yes, it does. It's a simple answer to that. I think that for many of us, what happens in self-compassion is, if we do something where we see ourselves as a failure, then we want to kind of pull back from people and not let that be known. But if we succeed, we don't want to sound arrogant, so we pull back there as well. And then we miss the support systems that we might need when something has gone wrong. And we miss those people who can celebrate with us when actually we've achieved something. So it's in both cases stepping towards people, even if, like myself, you are somebody who, I'm very introverted, I like my own company, I'm quite particular about who I have those connections with, but I still make the effort to step forward if something has gone wrong, to try and work on my ability to, if I've succeeded in something, to be acknowledging that, even if it might be a bit uncomfortable for me to do so. Because the world that we live in, this idea of social well-being, the connections that we have, there's some fantastic elements of it which can really support us in our health and well-being, our business. But also there's a darker side to it where, and I'm not anti-social media at all. I think that it has some darker sides to it, and it has some really positive sides to it as well. But a lot of people use it in a way where they lose out both ways. They're either comparing with somebody who it looks like they've done better than they have, and they feel worse, even if we know logically that there can be lots of editing behind that image that's being portrayed. Or we see somebody who we don't think is doing as well as us, and then we feel like we don't deserve to be feeling unhappy. So we lose out from both directions. And I think it's something where, as the digital world grows, and we, even like this, I've never met you in real life, but we've had some conversations on Zoom and things like that before. It's very different from meeting somebody in the real world, and the way that we connect is shifting, and the way that loneliness is increasing, due to people having lots of virtual connections, but maybe not as much depth. So it comes back time and time into self-compassion, the way that the world around us is changing, the way that actually we have to be more self-aware sometimes. And actually it can cause many people I work with to be a lot less kind to themselves than they would be otherwise.
It's just, so interesting, isn't it? And I think that, social connection, especially, human connection in terms of the real in-person sense, has such a role to play in your own relationship with yourself, doesn't it? And I think through the pandemic, where most of us became very isolated with the lockdowns and the restrictions that we had for quite some time, a lot of people, were very isolated socially, even though we had all of, these digital virtual options. I think a lot of people I'm hearing have changed on the back of that because they've realised that, maybe the way they were living was too hectic and busy and a lot of pressure there. And a lot of people actually liked that slower pace and not necessarily the isolation, but they liked being in their own home, maybe just being with their family. And I think we're seeing, for many reasons, not just this is a root cause, but, the mental health challenges people are facing have started to really increase because people are struggling with this return to a new norm. And it is a new norm because things have changed, like hybrid work, and it's obviously something which now is a word we didn't know 3 years ago, really. If you had hybrid work and it was really just work from home and you were lucky, one of the lucky ones, and people wish they could get homework and for themselves. But yeah, it's just fascinating, isn't it? Because our social connection, the behaviours we have socially have changed because of our digital and fast-paced technology world. And then COVID as well, coming into a kind of slowed social connection down in some ways, but at the same time we had the technological advances. And I think people are just kind of struggling, like, is it normal and fine to just do everything virtually, or should I be in person? And I don't think I like being in person. I don't know, so much that was coming to my mind when you were talking about all of that there. What do you think about that, Tom?
I think that it is an adjustment period for many people, and the useful part of it is that there's been a time to stop and reflect on what works for each of us as individuals. Because what was happening before was decades of similar processes, similar kind of morning routines for people up at a certain time, traveling to work, doing that, coming back home. And then we had that complete separation for many people. And they had to go, hold on, I was doing that routine all the time. Was that working for me? And if I have any control now over, and we don't often, but sometimes we have some control over elements of our lives, thinking about when I have a choice, what choice is that for me? And so for me, for example, I actually really love online connection. I find it drains me less than seeing people in person because the introversion part of me, I find in-person connection can be quite draining with people I don't know very well, even if I really get on with them. But that's a great thing for me to have that. But I also know that I have to make sure I make the effort to spend some time with people in the real world because I get a different form of connection, whether it's my partner, family, friends. And I think for each person, it's continuing just being aware of the way I'm working right now, the way I'm interacting from a business point of view and socially. Is it working for me? Am I energized from that? Am I exhausted from that? Am I getting my needs met from that? Was something missing? And then adapting and trying out different balances. So for some people I know they do all their one-to-ones and networking in person. Some, like myself, do it all online, and some do a mixture. It depends on what works for each of us. But I think it's worth people constantly just reassessing if things are working for them or not in their particular style. And if it's not, being confident to set boundaries and say to people, actually, I'd love to meet up in person, but I do that quite rarely. And you can explain why. And then actually say, we can meet earlier if you want to do it online, and perhaps down the road we can do that at a later date. But having confidence to say to somebody, I appreciate your working style, but that doesn't work for me at this time as well.
Yeah, and we're circling right back there to where we started with self-awareness and self-compassion, aren't we? In that, I think, the pandemic changed things for people. So they suddenly had new and different opportunities, some of which people liked, some of which they didn't. And then as we've returned to this new normal, they're starting to go, well, actually, I don't like being with people all day, every day. I think I felt better when I wasn't with people all day, every day. Or it's the opposite of, I need some time with people, but then I also do need that time for myself. And so, that self-awareness is really key, isn't it, to understand how you work, not in a business sense, but in your whole life, as a human, what helps you to thrive, what helps you to feel good, what helps you to build strong well-being so that you can feel happy and you can feel, full of vibrancy in your life. And then the compassion comes into it, because it's about accepting that it's not wrong to not want to be with somebody in person, or vice versa, not want to be doing things online. And I think a lot of people have been toyed with that, haven't they? Because it's, like, well, people are doing Zooms now, so I have no choice, I have to do Zooms. But as you said, it's having, that, I guess, that self-belief and confidence which comes from the compassion element of being strong enough to go, actually, I feel like I've done a lot of Zooms. I'd really like to maybe try something different, even if it's a phone call, so I can get outside and walk and not be sat staring at a screen. Or can we meet in person for a walk if you live close enough, and let's, have a coffee, or chat that way. So yeah, and that brings us on to, you've mentioned yourself as an introvert, and I know you do a lot of work supporting introverts, which I want to get a little bit more into, because this piece of knowing your personality type is really key, isn't it, to help with that self-compassion and building then strong health and well-being, because you understand how you tick and what support you need.
I love the way you've put that, Nicola. Yes, again, it comes back down to that self-awareness, to preferences. And although on every test I've ever used on introversion, I score really highly, normally kind of mid to high 90s. So I'm quite an outlier in that respect. And people might sit anywhere on that scale. I'm not a believer in lumping people into boxes. Either you are an introvert or an extrovert, unless people want to. If it works for them, if that label helps them, great. I like the label. It works for me. It helps me. Some people don't like the label. And it's more about wherever you sit on that scale of where you get your social energy, how you like connecting, how you think things through, all the elements of introversion and extroversion. It's just tapping into, what am I like? What are my preferences? Do I want to tap into those? Maybe kind of adapt some of those as well. And being able, as you said, that self-compassion about being able to embrace that and not try to change who you are and what you do because you think you're meant to be a certain way or you can't be successful. I was told recently by somebody that introverts can't run a business. And I would say straight away, people like Bill Gates would argue with that. You have billionaires out there who are extremely successful who identify as very introverted. But one of the things that happens with social connection is that introverts can go very strongly into the online world and be very good at connecting in that way, and maybe lose out a little bit with the in-person stuff. And sometimes there's a group I'm working with at the moment with a couple of schools who are younger and people who are very connected via technology, who have maybe thousands of followers and connections, often report really high levels of loneliness because there's not a genuine, deep connection going on with somebody who they feel understood by. So the introversion definitely has an impact, and it can be different for each person. And I'm enjoying exploring that with my clients at the moment a lot.
Yeah, introversion is definitely being talked about a lot more, isn't it? Because I mentioned this when Wade spoke a few weeks ago, that many years ago I did a personality test in work. It was the Myers-Briggs one. And when I scored as an introvert, I felt that was both a failure and a disadvantage, that because I wasn't extrovert, it meant I wasn't good enough, because I worked at Nike, and I would say on the surface anyway, most people appeared to be extrovert. And usually when we did these types of tests, we did them quite regularly. Many of the people who worked there did actually score higher on the extrovert than introvert scale. And so I just felt that there was this perception that an introvert was lacking in something, that you weren't good enough, because I saw an extrovert as someone who was highly confident, outspoken, charismatic, all of these things that I deemed as success or needed to be successful, and yet where I was on the scale meant that I was inferior in some way. And so I carried that kind of stigma, if you like, alongside the low self-worth and self-esteem I had, which did actually really play into, the anxiety and mental health challenges that I had. And so I really like that now, there's a lot more openness and awareness of what introvert extrovert actually means, and that it doesn't mean one is better than the other. You described it well in terms of where you get your energy from. That's the key thing. And the acceptance then comes when you have that understanding. So if you listen thinking, yeah, I've touched on this before and I don't like it, I don't want to be categorized, as Tom says, you don't have to put a label on yourself, but get aware of actually who you are and how you're taken, what gives you your energy and gives you what you need to focus and create and so on. And then learn to accept and embrace that and know that one isn't better than the other. Because I do think a lot of people, especially going back kind of 20 years, have struggled with this, haven't they? And I think now we're talking about it more. Hopefully we can break down some of those barriers that were put up, for different personality types.
Yes, I think so. And I think that there's been workplaces have historically, and things like politics too, have celebrated extroversion. So people who didn't fit into that category felt that they weren't able to be successful, couldn't be a leader, couldn't be a person of influence, or to be successful in a way society deemed was how you're meant to be successful. And part of it comes from some of the larger and most famous scales that measure introversion just saw it as not being extrovert enough. So a lot of the words that we use are just the opposite of extrovert. So we become shy, we become antisocial, and it's not the case. And a lot of people who meet me in my working environment would think I'm a massive extrovert because I do a lot of training courses, I have to talk to strangers, I have to engage with them and deliver things in certain ways. But I also book myself time after that to step away and to recharge and to reflect on things. And give them a choice, I like to be by myself or with very, very small groups of family and friends and my partner. And we are having a shift. We're having a shift which is celebrating introverted strengths. It was a session I ran last Friday about what are our quiet superpowers, what are the things that we embrace. An issue with that is people who are more introverted find it harder to self-promote. So there's a hesitation about actually going, I'm good at this, but sorry about that. But also in all the work I do, I really heavily encourage extroverts and ambiverts who are in the middle of the scale, anybody at all, to come along and to share different points of view, different experiences, so we can understand each other and our preferences more and more. Because sometimes what I'm seeing is as introversion grows in awareness and people celebrate that, some places do it by pulling down extroverts. And I don't agree with that at all. We just have different preferences, different strengths and abilities. And I would love it that whatever our personality type or preference, we are building each other up. That's really important to me.
Yeah, and with self-compassion then, do you think it's more difficult for one personality type versus the other to practice
Yes.
self-compassion?
Um,
Right.
While anybody can struggle with self-compassion, there is research to show that because one of the qualities of introverts, and the more you are down that scale, then you tend to be more reflective, you tend to focus inwards, whereas extroversion is more focused on the external world, external events. So for introverted people, the internal focus means people can self-analyze a lot, become extremely self-aware, and can also become extremely self-critical. So a lot of my clients who score very poorly on self-compassion score very highly on introversion. There does seem to be quite a big correlation,
Right.
both anecdotally and in the research that I've seen as well.
Yeah, it's like two sides of the coin, isn't it? You've got the self-critic on one side and then the self-compassion on the other. And it's trying to have that balance, isn't it? And one of the things that I've learned through some personal development I've done on imposter syndrome and self-doubt is it never goes away, but the habit of operating from that place automatically becomes less. that you embed the new habit of thinking positively and supporting yourself, so that's where, your mind goes to first. And if your mind does go to the self-critic instead, you can actually, as we talked about, self-awareness is very important. You can pick up on that very quickly, so you can go, oh, there's that voice. No, actually, this is what happened. This is how I feel. And you can, replace that with a different belief. And that's how you gradually build up that habit of instead being compassionate and supportive and encouraging of yourself, rather than always going to the self-critic. And it was funny because I would have guessed that introverts were higher on the scale of low self-compassion. But then I was thinking, maybe extroverts struggle as well, because extroverts can generally have very high expectations of themselves. And so when they fall short of those, are they then lacking self-compassion because they're very critical that they should have done that they have, the skills needed, for example, and, the style that they should be just delivering and getting after things, kind of the more in that push energy mode. Is that something you see?
I see it less often. It definitely happens. And as with all these things, it
Right.
depends on the individual themselves and their own expectations. It taps into growth mindset as well, how we respond to failure. Do we grow from that genuinely, or do we actually turn against ourselves and go, you failed at that, you're no longer good enough for what you do? The people I work with tend to be, if there is a higher score on extroversion, it tends to be that they can look at the next thing quite quickly. They are something of interest which pulls them towards that, which means there's a little less time dwelling than an introvert who might be spending a lot of time analyzing, reflecting, more time by themselves. So less external distractions going on, so more time thinking about that. But there's always exceptions. And I do have several extrovert clients and workplaces where there is an issue for them, where there's one who is a recruitment consultancy. Extroversion is very high in that, but so is self-criticism. Self-compassion is very low in that particular environment, and that's quite a common thing. So there are definitely elements of that. And if it's okay, just to go back to your tuning things out, I often use the description of, you might have two really close people in your life, both of whom have your best intentions at heart and you really like being with them. But one's very good at spotting the negative and telling you why things aren't very good and why things are going wrong. And at certain times, that can be useful. So you want to have them in your life. But if you only listen to them, that can be overwhelming and bring you down. The other person is very positive, very uplifting, and we don't listen to that person quite as much, even though they can really inspire us and cheer us. So in my head, when I explain it to clients I work with, you may always have those two people, but rather than focusing almost all of your time on the person who's good at spotting the negative, we actually focus more time on the positive person while still tuning into, when it's useful, that person who's looking out for you in a different way. I hope that makes sense to the listeners too.
Oh, it makes absolute sense to me. And it's similar to the way that I teach mindset as well, when I look at mindset of habits, and I talk about a pair of sunglasses and the colour of the lens in the sunglasses. And exactly to your description there with the positive and negative type person, I use something like that, the person who in your family probably finds every little thing to moan about, say you're at a perfect family gathering in a restaurant, and pick out the slightest little thing, like maybe the music's too loud, and that's what they focus on. Or, you wear a different colour lens and you see it through, oh, hasn't it got a lovely atmosphere, and isn't the menu really big and delicious, and it's great all of us being here together. So yeah, that really does make sense. And I want to cover the community that you're building, Tom, because I know you're so passionate about all of the things we've talked about with self-compassion, managing that inner critic, understanding the role social and human connection play in how you treat and care for yourself to build strong health and well-being. Because you can find out more about Tom. We'll share his details at the end and in the show notes. But you've had a journey yourself with overwhelm and having a big life shift to have to rebalance how well you were and how you were living your life. So you've built this community now that you are putting out there to support people who are struggling with this kind of thing. So yeah, I'd love you to just tell us a little bit more about that, and obviously where people can come and find and join you if they're interested in that.
Thanks, Nicola. First of all, I love your sunglass lens idea. I think that's beautiful. Yes, so I'm very passionate about this because I went through my own massive burnout, sort of derailed my career, restarted wanting to help other people with elements like this. And one of my focuses is very much on social well-being and human connection and an introversion within that. So I started up very recently. It's about a week and a half old, so it's a very, very new kind of little baby project, but it's growing, which is called the Introvert Impact. And it's designed to be not just for introverts, anyone who has an interest in introversion. We have lots of extroverts there, ambiverts there, non-labelers there, where we can create a safe space to talk about this kind of topic, to share experiences, points of view, look at the psychology and build each other up. So the idea behind it is that it's very much about human connection rather than so much the workplace, but that workplace bit obviously comes into it because we are in the workplace a lot of the time. So in the show notes, there's a link to how you can access the group. But anyone who has an interest in personal development, is open-minded and curious, and has a kind and respectful way about them, that's really important. We'd be loving to have you as part of that.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I think I might have to check that out. There's, such an opportunity there if you are someone who would struggle, as Tom described earlier, to be doing something like this in person, to go into a really safe and supportive place online and connect with people. And I know through my entrepreneur journey, I've made so many incredible connections online, as you said about our relationship. We've met so many people who support us in our business, in our mindset, which is always a challenge, running your own business and working at home alone as well, whether you like to be alone or not. So yeah, that's a brilliant community. And if someone's thinking, right, I know that I am very lacking in self-compassion, that I am, not my best cheerleader, I'm actually my worst critic, what kind of simple steps could you give someone to get started? Because I like to, get them started on the road to building a habit, but just with those really easy steps you could take in the next day or two.
I'm going to share two, if that's okay, Nicola. One of them is to be aware of someone called Kristin Neff. So she's one of the kind of the biggest names within self-compassion, and there's lots of free podcasts, YouTube recordings that really explain self-compassion in a powerful way. And she has a really simple workbook that you can work through as well at your own pace, if that's sort of a learning style that some listeners have. The other thing that you can do really simply is about that self-awareness, and it's, can you spot over the next couple of days what your typical self-critical phrase is? We tend to have one. It tends to be something not very polite, and so normally a few not podcast friendly words that might be in there, but can you pick it up and spot that? And what I get my clients to do is write down that critical phrase that they have, or more than one, on a piece of red card. And then a piece of green card, can we write down not something that's sort of fluffy or overly optimistic, something that is supportive and more balanced on the green piece of card? So rather than, you absolute idiot, I'm being polite, you've messed up again, you always vote things, why can't you do that? It becomes instead, okay, it didn't work out properly, and that can be tough. What have I learned from that, and what am I doing next? And then every time you spot that red phrase, next to it's the green phrase, and you can start very, very simply replacing it. But the awareness part, what is my language, is the first bit, and then stepping into how can I begin to change those phrases for myself.
Oh, absolute genius, Tom. Honestly, that's such a powerful thing to do, isn't it? And I think something I was thinking there when you said about the red card and writing it down would be, when you have started to get aware of that saying, coming into your mind and how often it is, maybe think about holding that card up to someone you care about and what impact that would have on them. I know I've talked about this kind of thing in a blog that I wrote last year, was about, thinking of what you say to yourself and how that would make somebody else feel if you were to say it to them. So yeah, take that red card, maybe not say it out loud, but hold it up to your partner or someone in your household family, and just see what their reaction would be. Because yeah, the voice we have internally is more powerful than anybody else's voice we can hear, and yet it's the voice that we have the least awareness of how it's impacting us. So brilliant suggestion for a good first step. So please try to do that if you are thinking that this could help you with, you know, where you are. And just to kind of wrap it up back to obviously what we're all about with living healthy, is that, you know, this is such a big part of health and well-being, because as I said at the start, you could do all of the practical things, if you like, in terms of the healthy habits that, you know, will fundamentally help your physical health and can help your mental health. But this piece of the well-being toolkit is huge for your mindset. And, you know, we know mental health impacts our physical health and vice versa. So we have to build a strong mindset, starting with how we feel and you know, love and support ourselves. So just to wrap up, Tom, brilliant conversation, loved everything we've talked about. If you want to share with people where they can find you, and of course it all will be linked in the notes as well for you to get there easy.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Been an absolute pleasure today. Thank you for having me on here, first of all. I've learnt a lot from our conversation, as I always do, I think, when you and I speak. So LinkedIn, you can find me under Tom Cleary Coaching on there. Happy to connect with people, have one-to-ones, etc. on there. Or come and find my website or my community through the show notes. I'm a big believer, because of how I came into this space through my own struggles. I'm not somebody who's a pushy salesman. If someone comes to me and says, I just want to know a book recommendation and I never want to hear from you again, that is fine. Please feel free to pick my brains on things. And if people want more than that, great. But if they don't, if I've helped somebody through recommending a podcast, website, anything at all, I'm always happy to do that. So LinkedIn is probably my main platform I communicate through, but show notes have a few more links in there as well.
That's a fantastic offer. Thanks, Tom. And that just is testament, you know, to the world that we're part of. I think, you know, a lot of people don't see the reality of how it is, and that we are here to serve. And, you know, things like doing this podcast and you giving me your time to help the listeners with their health and happiness is, you know, something that's so generous. And we do genuinely want people to be living better lives, and we know not everyone can afford to choose to work with a coach, whether one-to-one or in a group. So do take advantage of these kinds of offers that are out there, even if it's just following somebody like Tom, whose content can give you that inspiration and, you know, piece of guidance that you might be looking for and need right now. So yeah, thanks again, Tom. I'm sure we'll chat soon, and I look forward to, you know, hearing feedback if you listen to the podcast on what your key takeaway was.